Right, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're unpacking a massive New York Times report today, one that points to a potential U.S. ground operation in Iran that could frankly change the entire trajectory of this conflict. For a moment, we're completely bypassing the diplomatic tracks and ceasefire negotiations. Instead, we're focusing purely on the hard operational realities on the ground as of mid-May 2026. The sources are pointing to something categorically different from any military action we've seen so far. We are looking at the very real possibility of a direct, highly specialized ground incursion. So let's map out exactly what's being contemplated, the intense military capabilities required, and the glaring signals from all over the globe suggesting this is way more than just a contingency plan on a shelf. Let's actually start with a really pivotal line from the report, because understanding this specific deployment is literally the key to decoding the whole military puzzle. It reads, quote, "Several hundred special operations forces arrived in the Middle East in March." End quote. Look, this isn't some recent reactionary knee-jerk movement. This is a deliberately pre-positioned force. And we're not just talking about regular infantry. We're talking about Tier 1 units, Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. These operators have been sitting in the region for months, just waiting for authorization. And the option they're there to provide? It isn't another bombing run or enforcing a blockade. It's the option to send operators physically into Iran to seize highly enriched uranium. Okay, to really grasp why Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 are sitting in the region, we have to talk about their CWMD mission set. Countering weapons of mass destruction is this incredibly specialized capability that was actually born out of the Cold War. It's not just about kicking down doors and clearing rooms. These operators are certified in radiation detection, material characterization, and the incredibly delicate procedures for safely handling weapons-grade materials. They literally train with specialized containment equipment to assess, secure, and prep nuclear material for extraction without getting exposed to lethal radiation. It's a capability they've trained on for decades. And here's the wild part. It's never actually been used in a live nuclear recovery operation. But a hostile state's nuclear material requiring physical seizure, that's exactly the scenario we're looking at right now. And all that highly specialized training, well, it's focused on one very specific number: 440 kilograms. That is the amount of 60% enriched uranium currently sitting at the Esfahan nuclear site, which Iran has openly acknowledged possessing. Now, what's absolutely vital to understand about Esfahan is its physical layout. Unlike the Fordo facility, which is buried under hundreds of meters of solid rock, the processing and storage at Esfahan happen primarily in surface and near-surface structures. Sure, they're hardened against conventional air attacks, definitely. But a ground force? They wouldn't need to penetrate massive subterranean decks to get their hands on this 440 kilograms of material. So here is the absolute strategic nightmare military planners are dealing with. On one hand, you could use bunker buster bombs, like those massive ordnance penetrators dropped from B-2 bombers, to destroy the facility. But actually scratch that, because destroying the facility means destroying the material, which runs the very real risk of dispersing radioactive contamination across a massive area. You're basically looking at creating a colossal environmental hazard, like a giant dirty bomb scenario. On the flip side, ground recovery produces a clean, totally verified extraction, the materials accounted for, packed up, and neutralized. But it carries astronomical risks for the personnel involved. Planners are literally having to weigh an environmental catastrophe from a bombing against the terrifying prospect of Iranian military counterattacks on American operators. But how does that actually work on the ground? Well, you can't just drop a handful of operators in and wish them luck. Extracting that material requires a massive, deeply layered support force. First, you absolutely need overhead air suppression. We're talking F-35s and AC-130 gunships to degrade any immediate Iranian military response. Second, and this is crucial, you need a massive security perimeter. Isfahan is in a heavily populated area with very short military response times. It would take thousands of troops, likely the 82nd Airborne and Marine Corps units that are already in the region, just to hold off the IRGC and the Iranian army. Only then, deep inside that protective bubble, can the inner recovery element of Tier 1 operators actually do the meticulous, highly dangerous work of securing and extracting the uranium. Section 1, the intelligence gap and internal panic. Which brings us to a pretty glaring, immediate intelligence gap. We just saw a freshly announced $200,000 FBI bounty for the capture of Monica Witt. Now, at first glance, you might be wondering, why in the world is the intelligence community putting out a bounty on a defector right at this highly volatile moment? But when you look at what she actually knows, the timing makes total sense. This isn't just about accountability for some past crime. This is urgently, inextricably tied to the exact operation we just talked about. Here's the thing. Hunting Witt right now isn't about the past, it's active, urgent damage control. Monica Witt was a U.S. Air Force counterintelligence officer who defected to Iran. She exposed human intelligence sources and, critically, she compromised the exact monitoring methods used to track Iranian nuclear activities. Remember, the Delta Force mission completely relies on having an accurate, to-the-minute intelligence picture of Isfahan's layout, its security architecture, and exactly where that material is located. The more of that collection capability Witt compromised, the more blind those Delta Force operators are going in. Finding her could literally mean recovering information about what exactly the IRGC knows regarding American intelligence methods. Now, if we pivot and look inside Iran, we're seeing some wildly revealing behavioral signals. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has taken the totally unprecedented step of broadcasting AK-47 tutorials on state television. They are literally showing everyday civilians how to use the safety, how to rack the bolt, how to fire the weapon. And keep in mind, this is happening on a state-run information network that the regime controls with an iron fist, specifically to shape public behavior. I mean, really ask yourself, why would a government that strictly bans civilian gun ownership, a government that literally just used firearms to brutally put down a civilian uprising a few months prior, suddenly teach those exact same citizens how to rack a bolt? It makes no sense, unless you realize it's a performance of profound, absolute fear. This isn't some message meant to deter the American military. Let's be real, Delta Force isn't going to call off a mission because some civilians watched a gun tutorial on TV. No, this signals that the regime's internal threat assessment genuinely expects a physical, intimate ground invasion. They feel so backed into a corner that they think they need an armed civilian resistance. Section 2. Converging Global Signals. Okay, let's track the timeline here, because the picture it paints is impossible to ignore. We know those Tier 1 operators deployed back in March. Then, in early May, the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier rotated home. Now, to the untrained eye, that might look like things are de-escalating, but it's not a drawdown, it's a phase transition. The Ford sustained the initial combat phase, and it's leaving the USS Abraham Lincoln and George H.W. Bush to sustain the theater. And get this, that transition coincides perfectly with the mid-May observations of heavy, nocturnal jet activity over Iraq. Let me tell you, aircraft do not fly at high operational tempos over Iraq in the middle of the night just for practice. This looks exactly like pre-operation staging. When you put all these global signals together, the whole board just lights up. First, we've got Russian evacuation flights suddenly moving nationals from Somalia to the UAE. Russia absolutely does not do this based on vague rumors. This matches the exact behavioral pattern Moscow showed right before the war initially broke out. Their intelligence is clearly screaming that a kinetic event is imminent. Second, Iran announces this new toll mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz, a toll it literally has no navy left to enforce. It's a pure, unenforceable performance of defiance by an IRGC that knows its options are evaporating. And finally, the Times report explicitly states that authorization for all of this could come as early as next week. The geopolitical breadcrumbs are all pointing toward the exact same explosive event. And that brings us to the ultimate finality of this specific military option. Think about it. If the U.S. conducts a bombing campaign, the Iranian regime can probably absorb it. They can adapt, use state media to decry American aggression, and still maintain this fiction of regime strength. But, as the source analysis bluntly states, the physical seizure of highly enriched uranium by ground operators, that cannot be spun. If Delta Force rips that 440 kilograms out of Isfahan, it is an absolute, undeniable defeat. It physically ends the nuclear program's current material existence. It is the ultimate trump card, which is exactly why the stakes for both sides are just unimaginably high right now. So where does that leave us? Well, the diplomatic route has completely stalled out. Thousands of perimeter support forces are already locked into the theater. The Tier 1 operatives have been on standby, waiting in the wings since March. We're seeing Russian evacuation flights, Iranian state TV prepping everyday civilians for an invasion, and massive, unexplained nighttime jet activity over Iraq. The historical pattern of these signals has a next step, and as our source material makes very clear, it is definitely not a peace proposal. With the air assets staged and all these global signals converging like a giant puzzle, we are left staring at one massive, world-altering question. What exactly is going to unfold next week?